I've made a few mistakes in my career, and I have a few regrets too. But I've also learned what works and what I wish I'd done sooner. So if I was starting over again today, these are the 10 things I'd do differently. And no, this isn't a guilt-inspiring lecture about working 80-hour weeks just to get ahead. It's about getting better results through smarter behaviours, simple hacks, and a more realistic outlook on work and life. Some people are born with the to-do list gene. I wasn't. For me, it was a learned skill, but it's one that's made a huge difference to how I work. It gave me control, structure, and a way to stay sane once I figured out how to make it work for me. Here's what that looks like now. If something needs doing, I write it down. It either goes into my Excel-based action list or straight into my Outlook calendar, depending on the type of task. If I'm relying on someone else, whether I've delegated a task to them or I'm just waiting for them to do something, that also goes on the list with a target date and an owner. And then I share that detail with them so they can tell me if the timelines need to be adjusted. That one habit alone has saved me from so many last-minute surprises. Now, when it comes to daily action lists, I used to try to cram in everything, but I'd never finished the list, and it just left me feeling like I'd fallen behind. These days, I keep it simple. 1 to 3 key tasks. One of them is a must-do. The rest are optional wins. It's more realistic, it's more satisfying, and it helps me to stay focused on what actually matters. If I could start my career again, I'd adopt this system from day one, because using action lists isn't just about productivity. They help you to feel in control of your work, removing a whole layer of unnecessary stress. I'm not going to explain what a podcast is, you already know, but when I started my career, they weren't really a thing. I remember my friend Bernie suggesting that we make one, and when he basically explained it was just people talking on the internet, I couldn't see the appeal. Well, it turns out Bernie was ahead of the curve, and yes, we'll be talking more about embracing new tech a little bit later. But if I was starting my career today, podcasts, audiobooks, and even audio summaries would be part of my daily learning routine. The obvious benefit is accessibility. You can learn on the move, during a commute, at the gym, on a walk, and you're not just taking in facts, you're absorbing mindset, communication style, and how people think through problems. But here's the unexpected benefit. Podcasts humanize experts. When you hear an author, someone who's written a dense technical book, chatting casually on a podcast, it shifts your perspective. You realize they're not a genius in an ivory tower. They're a person. They're just further along the road, and that makes their path feel more achievable. So yes, podcasts, they can teach you things, but more than that, they can make growth feel accessible, and that's powerful when you're just starting out. When I first started out, I thought the more certificates I had, the more valuable I'd be. Prince 2, MSP, P3O, even management of risk. You name it, I chased it. And here's what I eventually realised. Most employers aren't looking for a wall full of certificates. They're looking for the 1 or 2 certificates that you keep seeing in job ads, the ones that actually matter for the role. A few years ago, I came across a term from Tim Ferriss that stuck with me. Minimum effective dose. It's the smallest amount of input needed to get the desired outcome, and anything beyond that is just a waste. And I've come to see certificate collecting in the same way. There's nothing wrong with getting more if it excites you, but be honest about why you're doing it and what result you're expecting. If I could go back, I'd stop chasing letters after my name and start building skills that I can use straight away. And the only certificates I'll be looking for are the ones that get me through the door and help me to do the job. Bonus tip, whatever you learn in your studies, apply it as soon as you can. Otherwise it fades fast. You've been warned. Early in my career, I didn't save. I spent what I earned, and I told myself I'd start saving later. But later meant staying in a few roles far longer than I should have done, simply because I couldn't afford to leave. Pay your savings bucket before you pay yourself. Even small, regular amounts build freedom over time. Think of your savings as your personal escape route. Don't wait until it's too late before you start digging the tunnel. I ran a little experiment recently. Who would you hire? A stranger with 100% of the skills you're looking for, or a former colleague you trust with about 66%? Well, most people pick the ex-colleague. Why? Because when someone's familiar, they feel like less of a risk. And that's how most hiring decisions get made. Not purely on skill, but on trust. So here's the takeaway. If you want better opportunities, build better connections. Stay in touch with people you've worked with. Make time for new introductions. Early on, I thought networking was awkward, maybe even fake. But I've learned that real networking isn't about business cards or cold DMs. It's about relationships, trust, and credibility built over time. So check in, share something useful, offer help, because one day you'll need someone to take a chance on you. And when that day comes, your network might be the reason you didn't get overlooked. Hey, if you're enjoying this, please hit the like button so more people get to see the video. Thank you. I used to hesitate. Is this just a trend? I'd keep asking. That hesitation made me late for social media, late to crypto, and I thought I was late for AI too, though I may finally be a little bit ahead of the curve now. But here's the thing. Staying curious about new tech isn't just for IT teams or innovation labs. It's one of the easiest ways to discover tools that make your work faster, smarter, and less stressful. Right now I'm testing this little device, the Claude AI Note Taker. I clip it on during meetings and it records and identifies voices, transcribes the conversation, and summarizes it into clear action points, straight out of the box. But it gets better. I use Zapier to automatically push those summaries into my OneNote folders. No extra cost, no manual steps, fully automated. Now I'm not saying you need to go and buy this exact gadget. The point is, small tech upgrades, when you're paying attention, can quietly transform how you work. And the only reason I found this setup, I went down the rabbit hole one evening just exploring automation and productivity at work. So be curious. You never know what small discovery could give you back hours of your week. Every now and then, a new leader joins the organization. They arrive with big hopes and even bigger promises, and then they disappoint. Sometimes they fall short of their goals entirely. Sometimes they hit their targets, but the way they do it leaves a bad taste. And sometimes they deliver results, all in the right way. But once you get to know them, you realize you just don't like them. If that sounds really cynical, I'm sorry, but here's the thing. All we're really doing here is managing our own expectations. And it's really easy to assign high expectations to people, especially those with the title leader. But they're still humans, and all humans are flawed. So why do we set ourselves up for disappointment from our leaders? My advice now is to respect the title, and have a little hope that your leader will be the exception and not disappoint. But never outsource your growth, your stability, and your prospects to someone just because they sit higher on the org chart. Take ownership of your own life and be your own leader. Chances are you'll be a lot less disappointed. The corporate world can be brutal. Sometimes you'll get criticised, sometimes unfairly, sometimes publicly. Early in my career, I let those moments get under my skin. Unfair feedback would linger, I'd overthink it, get defensive, and worry about how others saw me afterwards. But over time, I learned something important. Most people aren't paying as much attention as you think. They're wrapped up in their own pressures, priorities, and insecurities. What does get noticed, though, is how you carry yourself in the aftermath. Lashing out, sulking, or holding on to resentment, even if you're technically in the right, will often do more harm to your reputation than the original slight. So these days I try to do two things. First, I separate the delivery from the intent. If the criticism is constructive, even if it's clumsy or poorly phrased, I take it on board, and that's how you grow. But if it's ego-driven, vague, or clearly meant to undermine, I let it go. That does mean making a quick judgment about the intent behind the comment, But not every remark deserves your energy, and not every critic deserves space in your head. Second, I manage my response. Not everything needs defending. Not every battle needs fighting. Having a thick skin doesn't mean pretending nothing hurts. It just means choosing what's worth responding to and what's better left alone. Because in the end, it's not the praise or the criticism that defines you, it's how you show up consistently over time. This one's hard to admit. There are times in your career when you need to be tough, assertive, relentless, focused. But early on, I didn't always draw the line as well as I should. Sometimes I wasn't just firm, I was cold. Sometimes I was impatient, dismissive, even cruel. And out of all of the mistakes I've made, those are the ones I wish I could take back. Not because they hurt my career, but because they hurt people. And that's what lingers. Here's what I learned. Kindness isn't weakness. It doesn't mean lowering your standards or letting things slide. It just means treating people like humans, even when you're under pressure. It's taking the extra second to explain, not just demand. It's remembering the person who made a mistake probably feels worse about it than you do. It's ignoring the clever jibe that springs to mind and choosing gentler words instead. And it's choosing grace over ego, even when no one would blame you for doing the opposite. In the long run, people remember how you made them feel. The pressure fades, the deadlines are forgotten, but the kindness, or the absence of it, stays with them. If I could start again, I'd remind myself, be ambitious, be driven, but always be kind. Seriously, get more sleep. I spent years priding myself on late nights and early starts. I thought I was making progress, but really, I was just borrowing energy from tomorrow and paying it back with interest. Fatigue, foggy thinking, low willpower, sloppy work. Here's what I wish I'd known. Sleep isn't a luxury. It's a force multiplier. It sharpens your focus. It improves your decision making. It gives you more patience when things go wrong and more clarity when things get complex. Productivity isn't about how early you start. It's the result of clear thinking and high energy. And no amount of time blocking or goal setting is going to fix a brain that's running on fumes. And then there's the long-term cost. Lack of sleep isn't just tiring, it's damaging. Higher stress, weaker immunity, greater risk of burnout, illness, and in some cases, the kind of mistakes that change a career for the worse. If I was starting again, I'd drop the badge of honour that comes with exhaustion. I'd protect my sleep in the same way I protect a deadline, non-negotiable, because in the long run, rest isn't what slows you down, it's what makes you unstoppable. Bonus tip, work from a place of rest. Now, here's a bonus tip, and it changed the way I approach work. It came from a video by documentary filmmaker Mark Bone, and it stopped me in my tracks. He warned of the dangers of working towards a place of rest. He was talking about how so many of us push through exhaustion, telling ourselves we'll rest after the deadline, after the launch, after the next big milestone. But that mindset, I'll rest when it's done, is often what leads to burnout. Because when you're constantly deferring recovery, your work suffers. And so do you. When I first heard that, I was running on empty. And it hit hard because I realised I was stuck in the exact cycle, chasing rest like it was some kind of a reward, rather than the fuel that I needed to begin with. So here's the shift. Rest before you need it. Recover early, rebuild your energy, and then go back to work clear-headed, focused and grounded. Because when you work from a place of rest, you don't just survive the pressure, you do better work, and you last longer doing it. So those are the things I'll do differently, not to guarantee success, but to build a career that feels more intentional, more effective, and a lot less draining at times. Some of those lessons came easy, most didn't. But if you're somewhere along the same path, maybe this list's going to help you to find your footing a little sooner than I did. Please let me know in the comments which of these tips has resonated with you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.